3.1 Integers. So the title of this chapter in your book is called 3.1 What's a Negative Number? So that's obviously related. They're related to each other. But integer is a more fancy or sophisticated term, and it's actually a little bit different than perhaps a negative number. So I wanted to make sure I told you the definition of both. So the definition of an integer is written here at the top. Integers are positive and negative non-fractional, non-decimal numbers. So things that are integers are things like -7, 2, -10, 5, 0. Those are all positive and negative, non-fractional, non-decimal numbers. Some people argue that 0 is not positive or negative, but it still falls into the category of integers. In math, they use big, fancy symbols to define certain sets of numbers. So this capital Z with a double bar in the middle is what would be the symbol for integers when you're talking about these positive and negative non-fractional, non-decimal numbers. And you'll see that again and again in my work, not so much in Linus's book, but in my work you'll see this double-barred Z to represent integers. If you look at this number line down here, you will see all integers from -10 to +10. Okay, so what's the difference between that and a negative number? Well, the negative number would imply that we can now include fractions and decimals. So I did one that was of decimal, -3 1/10. So that is considered a negative number. There are 3 words that are associated with negatives. And I want you to get used to seeing them and thinking about them like negatives. So the first one is I could say this number up here as the opposite of 3.1. So the opposite of 3.1 to me means, well, here's 3.1, and the opposite of that would be -3.1. Okay, number 2, -3.1. Well, that's the one you're probably like, oh yeah, no duh, -3.1. Okay, another way of saying that number up there. Okay, number 3, -3.1. Well, usually you see this within a problem, but whenever you see -3.1, it actually just means -3.1. I know you may not believe me about number 3 yet, or it may seem funny, so just give yourself through this chapter, and then I think you might start to agree with me. So -3.1 on a number line falls in between -3 and -4. Remember that -4 is actually smaller than -3. -3.1 is actually smaller than -3, and it would be roughly here on the number line, -3.1. So -3.1 is smaller than -1. -3.1 is smaller than 10. And if anything gets confusing on this chapter, use a number line. Think about a number line. It really does help. Another one you might think is -10. Is that one smaller or bigger than -3.1? Well, it's actually smaller than -3.1. Or if you read it backwards, -3.1 is bigger or greater than -10. I could write it this way. It's greater than -10. Okay, now there's some words that mean negative also that are important to think about as well. So let me zoom out on this. There we go. I dug a 3-foot hole. Well, if I dug a hole, I'm going under the earth or under the ground, so I'm going to think about that as -3. My negative's a little funny there, sorry. Or I traveled 200 feet below sea level. Well, maybe you're in a submarine, or maybe you're just in Death Valley where it's actually dry, but you're below sea level. That would be -200 feet. That's how you'd say below sea level. Same with this one, feet. Okay, my stock went down 30 points. It was up and now it went down. So where am I? I'm at -30 points. Or I might think about where I was before and then subtract 30 points, but again, it's still implying a negative direction. I owe Cammie $50. Can you believe that? I owe her $50. So how much money do I have? -$50 is what's in my wallet because I owe her that $50. And last but not least, it is 20 degrees below 0. So most of the time you'll see it expressed this way. And then depending on Celsius or Fahrenheit, we'll say Fahrenheit because we're in the US. Science teachers wouldn't like that. So those are different ways of using negative numbers. So this lesson's just an introduction to negative numbers, and then the rest of the chapter deals with adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing them. Good luck.